I'm going to try to contain my excitement. I have been counting down the days till I get to share with my audience, my friend, and the amazing Tracy Otsuka. Tracy, I'm going to tell you, I cannot wait for my audience to hear your story is both inspiring and transformative. And it's highlighting a journey from personal challenge to a broader mission of advocacy and empowerment for women with ADHD. I'm so fortunate to call you a friend and have you as a guest today. Thank you for joining me.
Oh my gosh, it's my absolute pleasure. What an introduction. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, I really had to make some notes because I knew we could talk for probably 3-4+ hours. And we're going to be in person together soon at an event, which I can't wait for. But I want to dive right into this topic because I got to share with everybody. First of all, this right here, freaking amazing. Her book, ADHD for Smart Ass Women. As a matter of fact, when I went to the local bookstore, and you can find it at your local bookstore, I actually took a picture and texted it to you. I was so excited to find it on my local shelf. And congratulations on your book. So exciting for you.
Thank you. It was really hard, but it was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was probably also one of the most satisfying things.
I want to say this next statement because it really caught my attention, and then I'd love for you to share a little bit of your story. On your website, you say, in ADHD, ignorance is public enemy number. And wow, what a statement.
Yeah. So 75% of women with ADHD are currently undiagnosed. And I think that number is low. What you hear in the industry, and I'm a certified ADHD coach, I'm a lawyer, I have the #1 podcast on ADHD called also ADHD for Smart Ass Women. And of course, I just wrote this book with HarperCollins of the same name, ADHD for Smart Ass Women. I also have a patented program called Your ADHD Brain is A-OK, where I've taken hundreds, if not thousands at this point, of women through what it really means to have an ADHD brain. Because all we ever hear about is the pathology. And when 75% of all women are undiagnosed that have ADHD, you start to wonder, well, what the hell's going on? And ADHD is no different than a lot of the lack of care we have for women when it comes to any kind of medical problem that we might have, whether we're talking about heart disease or we're talking about all of the inflammatory diseases that women typically get much more than men. We know that women generally have more pain and we feel more pain, yet we are given less pain medication than men are. So I don't know what else to call it but medical misogyny, and sadly, ADHD is no different. Most of the studies are done or have been done with white prepubescent boys. And so most people do not know what ADHD actually looks like in women. First of all, I should explain that ADHD, it's a neurobiological condition, and it means that you're hyperactive, you can't sit still, or the hyperactivity is in your brain. You are impulsive, so you don't think before you act. You struggle with focus. So you're kind of, what it looks like is you may be all over the place. But what I really want to say and what I want to make clear is that ADHD, I don't believe it's a disorder. Granted, it's named attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but everything about that name is a misnomer. It's false. So there is a study that came out of Canada in 2022 that nobody talks about. And it was a big study that showed that 43% of all people with ADHD are actually in excellent mental health. I didn't say okay mental health. I didn't say good mental health. I said excellent mental health. And we know that there are people in our world, people like Greta Gerwig, who just did all the Barbie stuff, and I think she produced it. And I think her movie is the highest grossing movie ever. Over $1 billion. Simone Biles, we know, has ADHD. Lisa Ling, the investigative reporter, we know she has ADHD. And of the thousands of women that I have had the privilege of meeting, I have never met a one that wasn't truly brilliant at something. And I think all of those women that are classically successful will tell you that they are not successful despite their ADHD. They are successful because of it. Because with ADHD, yes, there are some weaknesses. Okay. Am I a little bit hyperactive? Yes, I'm very hyperactive. But is hyperactivity really a bad thing? How about we call it energetic? And who doesn't want to have more energy? I mean, sometimes I feel like the Energizer Bunny where everybody else is dropping around me and I'm still going. And if you're an entrepreneur, isn't that a wonderful skill to have? We don't like to be told what to do. And so that's why you'll find a lot of us in business, because we are our own bosses and we can do things the way we want to do them. And if you've struggled in school, which a lot of people with ADHD do, some don't though. Some are absolutely, that is their area of brilliance. But then when they get out of school, they may struggle because of the lack of structure. And as much as we balk against structure, we don't want to be told what to do, we really need structure and systems. You know this, Kristina, right? But we need our own structure and our own systems. We already have them. Just because they're different from a neurotypical, like a typical brain systems, and from what we were told the way we should do it in school, that doesn't mean that our systems are different. That doesn't mean our systems are wrong. I think the more we realize that, okay, we need to adopt systems that work for our brains. And I bet you there are a lot of people in your audience who are thinking, ADHD, I think I know what it is. I don't need to pay attention. I don't even care to listen to this podcast. And I just want to ask you to hold up a second, because we don't know what ADHD looks like. And so there are 3 telltale signs that you don't typically hear of. The first one is unexplained underachievement. So you're dealing with someone who you can clearly tell how bright they are, how curious they are, how interested they are, but they don't seem to have the success that you would expect for how intelligent they are. Number 2, consistent inconsistency. So in school, this would be my son. He would get A's and F's in the same subject in the same week. So you can imagine having a brain like that you never quite understand, okay, when is it going to really show up and it's going to be my amazing brain, and when is it not going to show up and I'm not going to be able to rely on it. And the third one is typical productivity tips and tricks. They don't work for our brains. So things like eat the frog. Oh my gosh, never. So that is, you have to do the hardest thing first thing in the morning. No, our brains don't make enough dopamine, or they don't process dopamine the way a typical brain does. We don't know for sure. But in order to, because of that low dopamine, we have to go throughout our morning and constantly ratchet up the dopamine. And so doing the smaller things to get to the big thing is typically what works for us. Time blocking, like, no. First of all, we have no sense of time, and we're all about the freedom, right? So don't tell me to block out all my time the week before. I'm not going to know when I show up if I'm going to want to do it that day. So I'm not going to do it at all. I just won't even look at my calendar. Now, the 2 things that all ADHD brains have in common is, number 1 is interest. When we are interested, the sky is the limit. We are amazing at it. And that might be why in school, there were certain subjects that you were so locked in, you were so hyper-focused, you just loved. But the school system goes wide and not deep, right? And so all of those other things that you had to do, those other classes, you were so bad at them and you hated them. You had no interest. And so you start to think that, oh, I'm just not very smart. That is as far from the truth as can be. When people are in their area of interest with an ADHD brain, they learn faster and they learn better than a typical brain because we hyperfocus. The other thing that is really important for the ADHD brain is positive emotion. You know how our friend Dr. Christine Lee, she always says, when we feel well, we do well. And that's positive emotion. So when the ADHD brain is in positive emotion, again, the sky's the limit. But when we're in negative emotion, when people are telling us how awful we are and we can't do this and all the things we can't do, it just sends us into negative emotion. We can't even get out of bed. And so when you are talking about interest, we're not just talking about school, and we're also talking about our careers, and we're talking about home. So especially with women, you will see a lot of really successful, like C-suite type women that are entrepreneurs, women that are running their companies. And I'm saying women because that's who I work with, but it's the same for women and men. And so they have these interest-driven brains. So they're so brilliant in that area. But then maybe the administrative details, maybe all the crap that you have to do at home, like get your kids lunch packed, make sure they get to school on time. A lot of this is sexism because why are women supposedly better at that? It's not true. It depends on the human being. It depends on the brain. But all of those details those administrative details, they are boring. And they're like Groundhog Day. You get through one day, paying bills, the wash, all of the stuff, making sure the kitchen's cleaned up before you go to bed. You get through one day and it starts all over again. And those are the kinds of things that ADHD brains are not good at because they typically do not have an interest in them. So I just vomited all over.
I really love everything you're sharing. And I wish that I would have set this up to where today's special host is Tracy Otsuka, because you are just delivering all kinds of gold nuggets across the board. And this is something that I'm going to share that I didn't talk to you about beforehand, but I can remember one of the conversations we had when we were talking about your business, and we've been together with our good friend, Dr. Christine Lee. That's the connection that brought us together. And you said something to me about, like, that you have ADHD. And I remember like nodding, like, I'm not going to say nothing. Like, can you nod with answering? I'm going to tell you something. That is when there were things that clicked with me. Of course, I started reading more of your stuff online. When your book came out, I dove into it. And I was just like having these light bulb moments. And then you were on Jenna Kutcher's podcast. And if I told you the truth of how many times I've listened to that episode, and it was just this moment of, you can use this to your advantage. It's really just fall in love with your brain. Okay, maybe it's a little different. Different doesn't mean bad, like you said. And I've heard you say before about too much. For some people, I'm sure I can be too much for people. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing.
They're not your people.
They're not your people. And working with clients over a span of a couple decades, you want to make sure you're a good fit, that you connect with people you're working with. And it's okay if they're not your people. And you've said about being too impulsive, too scattered, too disorganized. That's probably one of the things that hit home for me was I feel like I have a messy area. And that's how I do my best work. And when you talked about the time blocking, and I think you're the one that said something to me about time blindness.
Yeah.
I think I had a conversation with you about this, is you can have the best intentions. You can have a schedule.
Yeah.
You can do time blocking or attempt to do time blocking. You can do the 5 a.m. thing that you're up before anybody else, or you can try to do your hardest task in the morning. None of that shit works for me. Yeah. And when I heard that term, I just was like, why can I not get this nailed down? And that's when I started to give myself a little grace in my schedule and not do things back to back to back, because then it was constantly, how do I keep up or how do I catch up? I was setting myself up for failure from the jump. But it goes back to what you said, is having a better understanding how I can harness this to my advantage. So appreciative to you on that. And that's why this topic for me is so important, because just the small adjustments, that not only awareness, but that little adjustments that I've made, I'm going to be honest, Tracy, have made a hell of a difference. So that's why I want to share this out with others, because I work with a lot of small businesses and entrepreneurs, most of which are solopreneurs and wearing multiple hats. So when the cards are stacked against you, and you might function a little different, if you have a better understanding, I feel like you can leverage more to your advantage.
Absolutely.
Now
it is about the shame, right? If you think it's a character flaw, if there's a moral failing, and everybody else can do it this way, what is wrong with me? You're just constantly that negative, and you've got an ADHD brain, and let's say you're more inattentive than hyperactive, and women tend to have double the amount of inattention than men with ADHD. And you look kind of shy, and you're sort of like the absent-minded professor. So you're brilliant in your one area, but everything else not so much. You're not in your body because you're always in your head, so you lose things. You can't retrace your steps because you get from point A to point Z and you don't even remember how you got there. So that's more in your head. And so if you're already in your head and then you're beating yourself up in your head, how can that be good? Versus once we understand that, no, it's not a moral failing. It's not a character flaw. I'm not doing it on purpose. I just have a different brain that works using a different operating system. So like you said, you start to implement or see, oh, well, that's why that strategy works for me and this one doesn't.
Yes, and this plays such a role because working with people with tech, systems, processes, and digital marketing, strategies work so much better when you have a roadmap to follow. But not every person's roadmap is the same. You can be in the same business, the same industry, and your roadmaps are completely different. Even though you might need, probably most people do, if we're being honest, content for whatever business or whatever you do, you need content these days. And even implementing a system to create the content, but process the content and not just let it go somewhere and basically die and sit and not be utilized. My roadmap is different than someone else's roadmap. I think it's respecting that we can get to the same result in various methods. Now, in what I do, I try to find and work with people on the most efficient processes, systems to help them in their business. But no matter if it's business or personal, I think respecting how people function is so important.
Well, and that's the third prong. So we talked about interest and we talked about positive emotion. The third one is you are the only expert on you. And that is because we are the only ones that have that rudder inside ourselves, right? That notifies us by feeling positive emotion and saying, oh, I feel really good. Okay, I should do more of that. Oh, I don't feel so good. Okay, I need to do less of that. And so I think what happens to a lot of women, because most women with ADHD have to go to 3.2 different clinicians to finally get the proper diagnosis. So they're diagnosed with anxiety, they're diagnosed with depression, they're diagnosed with all the personality disorders because, of course, we're women, right? It's never PTSD, it's never trauma, it's borderline or bipolar. Anyway, my point is simply that if something doesn't make sense to you, and it could be anxiety, it could be depression, it could be comorbid with ADHD, but often you treat the ADHD and the anxiety or the depression will resolve itself. At a minimum, it will get a lot better. But if you have a doctor who's handing you all this medication and saying, no, this is what you have, this is what you need to try, and you're taking this medication and you're not getting better, you're actually getting worse. And we all know people who have been on medication literally for decades. And I'm not saying that some people don't need to be on medication for decades, but if it is not making sense to you, you need to look at ADHD because ultimately it's all a social construct, right? Our education system, our business systems, we have someone, usually a typical brain, has decided that this is how we're going to be in the world. And if you have that different brain where, nope, that's not how I want to do it. My number one value is to challenge the status quo. I want to see how can we change it up? How can we shake it up? How can we make it better? And that is the ADHD brain. So we complain a lot about, oh, this unfocused brain. Well, the focused brain, your typical brain, sees things one at a time, right? They see them in a linear fashion. They go into a problem usually knowing exactly what they expect, right? And because they expect it, that's what they come up with. Versus an unfocused brain, like a neurodivergent brain with ADHD like mine, it goes into a problem unfocused. It notices everything all at the same time. And then it picks the pieces it wants, puts them all together into a novel new way to solve a problem, a new widget, a new theory. That is what the ADHD brain does. It because we have all the thoughts all at the same time. That's creativity. It's not just, yes, we're highly creative in art forms and music and dance and all of that, or we can be, but creativity is also creativity of thought. And I personally believe that most entrepreneurs are somewhere on the ADHD spectrum because it's a spectrum. And if 10 to 20% of a population has ADHD or some other neurodivergency, is it really a disorder or is it just a variation on normal? And as I said, I've never met a woman with ADHD. I've never met a man with ADHD. I've never met anyone with ADHD that wasn't truly brilliant at something. And so the key is to be focused in your area of interest, forget all the other stuff, and then, of course, get as much help as you can on the things that you just know you're not going to do. You hate them, but you need the systems. Build the systems out, the guardrails, the structure.
This is such great information. And when you were just explaining that, I get a lot of feedback from people with what I do with different softwares, tools, technologies, and things like that, and simplifying it. And I think it's one of the ways that I have benefited from how my brain functions is I can take all of these different things, pull them down, and really streamline a system or processes for people in a different way where they can't see it for themselves or they can't figure out what that roadmap is or that strategy is for their business. And I think that is so important. How you just said that is about pulling out certain parts and bringing it all together. We all arrive at a destination. We just took different paths to get there. And I love how you were explaining this. One of the things I'm curious to ask you about is, do you or can you share like a key strategy that you found most effective for women to harness their ADHD in a professional setting?
So, especially as women, we can be people pleasers, right? We want to make everybody happy. And we think that if they're happy, we're going to be happy. But that's not true. Because if we are doing what they want us to do, guess what? We're living their life instead of our own. And we can do that maybe 20s, 30s. But once you get into your mid 40s, you're like, that inner rudder, it can't take it anymore, right? So what I always say is the starting point when you are struggling to get something done is to ask yourself, is this my intention? Is it my intention to get this thing done for myself because I feel it's important? Or am I doing all these things because someone else thinks it's important? And I was talking about that interest-driven brain. Well, it's an interest-based nervous system versus an importance-based nervous system. The rest of the population, the typicals, can look at something that's important to other people to get done, to society to get done. You need to get good grades in school. So you're going to show up, you're going to do the work, you're going to remember your homework, all of that stuff, right? Or your spouse really wants you to do this thing and you don't really want to do it, but okay, he wants me to do it, I can just do it. Or your boss, you need to do all the spreadsheets and this administrative detail, you need to do it, so I just do it. Versus an interest-based nervous system, we have to be interested. We have to really want to do it. Now, we can shift that. So let's say your partner really wants you to do something for them and you love your partner, right? You can turn it like, what's in it for me? Well, what's in it for me is that my partner is going to be so happy and he or she does so much for me every day that I am going to be uncomfortable and get this thing done for them because it makes me uncomfortable to do it. Obviously, you don't want to be stepping on your own values. You can convince yourself that I'm going to get that done for that person. But if that's all you're doing, if there's no intention behind it, that's the problem. And so what I always recommend is I always plan my week out on Saturday mornings. And my whole focus of my week is what is that one thing that I want to get done to move my business forward, what's important to me forward. And that is the number one thing that goes on I don't use a regular calendar. I have a planning system where we use cards and the one card for the week sits on your desk because it's easy in, easy out, right? Many of us have calendars and we'll be using them or planners, we'll be using them for 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden forget we have a planner. And I just had this graveyard of planners because it's not easy in and out. You've got to find the planner. You've got to find the proper month. You've got to find the proper week. Then you've got to find the proper day. Like, who the hell's going to do that? So I would literally have planners for 2 weeks and they're all filled in. And then I would one day just forget I had a planner. So this card system is what works for me. And so at the top of my card, what sits at the top of my card is my focus for that week is the one thing that if I get nothing else done, it's for me, it moves what I want to move forward, and that is what I'm going to do. A lot of ADHD people feel unsuccessful because they have a million things on their to-do list for the week, none of them have anything to do with what they want to move forward. And so no wonder it's so hard to get through them. And so then they have a million things, they've done 3. Yeah, you'd feel like a loser too, right? Versus if you have that one thing that you want to accomplish for you, and let's say I don't really ever put more than 1 or 2 steps of it for each day on my week. But if I get those things done and I get nothing else done, it's a successful week because I had intention behind it and it was something I wanted to move forward. And then the other thing I would say is when you are struggling, let me give you an example where we were having our bathroom remodeled, our main bathroom. Then it went on to our master bedroom was being remodeled. What I wanted was when my kids moved away to college, I started sleeping with my cell phone, because I was so worried if something were to happen to them, I wouldn't know. And so the reason why I brought this up, the whole bathroom thing and moving into my kid's bedroom, was because that is where I did it, in my daughter's bedroom, where I finally decided that this is ridiculous. I literally wake up in the morning and I'm looking at my phone because it's right by the bedside. And this doesn't feel good. I've now lost 25 minutes. I don't even know how I've lost it. None of it was of value. I am going to stop doing this. But it was hard because I had developed this habit. So what I do is I develop an identity around it. I figure out my intention. Why is it that I don't want to do this? And what do I want to do instead? I want to drink a glass of water and I want to get right into my gym because I need to work out for my brain every morning. That's what ratchets up the dopamine and allows me to get done what I need to get done. That's my intention. And so I build an identity around it. I am the kind of person who gets up in the morning, drinks a glass of water, and goes and works out. There was nothing in there about sits on her cell phone for 25 minutes. And so once I developed an identity around it, I took ownership. So I'd wake up in the morning, and you may have to put a Post-it note so that you remember what your identity is for a while. But once you've got it up there and it's in your brain, it is so much easier to stop these bad habits than, oh, I just want to stop playing on my cell phone in the morning. Well, why? Why is this important to you? Are you sure this is important to you? Or did you read an article and they said this isn't good? Or do you really realize that it does not start your day out in a productive, positive, emotion-inducing kind of way? And so it's the intention, but then build an identity around it. And you can start with something as simple as, I'm the kind of person who gets up every morning and drinks a glass of water. We pretty much all, we don't know it, but we pretty much all walk around with dehydrated, sad, shriveled up little brains. And that affects our cognition. And so once you start hydrating yourself on a regular basis, you realize what a difference it makes. For the longest time, I just thought it was aging, that my eyes burned all the time. And by the end of the day, I'm thinking, oh, it's makeup. And it was a little bit of it, but no, what it was is I was completely dehydrated. I just didn't realize it. Intention, identity.
I love what you shared there about it can be a small thing. One thing that just clicked with me is where I have fell in a trap with this is using my cell phone as an alarm clock. And then guess what? It's then in your hand. Then you have to
turn it off
to put it down. And I'm not knocking. I've heard people say in the first 15 minutes before I get up out of bed, I check my emails, I respond to what I need to, and then I have an hour or two routine that I do. And that's the thing is I'm not here to knock anyone's system or what works for them. But I love what you just shared is turning off the alarm and putting down the phone is a small change to breaking a habit potentially, because I've been guilty of that. The next thing you know, 15 minutes is gone. And with time blindness, not always is time on your side to lose 15 minutes. And other times that I've recognized this recently, I shared with you before we started recording. One of the things I've been doing is leaving my phone on vibrate, because when you have intentions for the day and you have things that need to be accomplished and you don't want to be doing those at 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. See, I could keep going with that time. But
right, me too.
If I constantly allow for those distractions throughout the day, I get further from accomplishing what my intentions were or what was on my schedule for that day. And I'm the one that allows that. And so I love the things that you've shared, because I do talk about boundaries, not only setting expectations, but also boundaries. And I've been a people pleaser. That is something that I a lot of times say it's a blessing and a curse, because a lot of people say, oh, you have such a big heart. You always work from such a place of you care. And to me, that's always been who I am. That's how I've functioned. But sometimes I think it can be a blessing and a curse by my own things that I allow to happen, is wanting to please people, saying yes when you know good and well you should have said no, or not saying yes right now, but saying, yes, I would love to help you with said problem in 2 weeks. So a lot of the things that you just shared there, just the smallest little change can make a big impact.
Let me tell you why. Because what you're doing is you're generating more positive emotion because you made a commitment to yourself and you kept it and you're proud of yourself. And so that fires up the dopamine and you want to do more of that. It's not about other people being proud of you. It's about you being proud of you.
One of the things that I've noticed most recently is when you funnel down and you work in your zone of genius, or your zone that you enjoy, that you are more productive. You're happier, so you are more productive, and you are proud of yourself. And I think that is something that a lot of people struggle with, is we have these wide nets that we cast when we want to we love here. We love this little small area, but we've said, yes, sure, I can do that. Oh, yeah, I can help you. But it's really not in our zone, in our niche, because we want to help people. And that is something that I'm so glad that you shared. And as I said when we started, I felt like we could talk for hours. This is something that hits home for me. And I'm so fortunate that we have the mutual friend in Christine. And now to call you a friend, it's made an impact for me. So I thank you for that.
I second that.
Before you go, I want to say thank you so much for your time. You've shared so much great information. I would love for those listening to know, first of all, they have an opportunity that they can hear more about ADHD from you. You have a podcast, the book. You also have a program that is available. So would you share, how would you like people to connect with you?
Thank you, first of all. And probably the best way is my website, ADHDforsmartwomen.com. Google doesn't like that ass word. And depending on when they come into my universe, we are running a program called 3 Days to Fall in Love with Your ADHD Brain. And if they go to my website, ADHDforsmartwomen.com, there's a sign-up form right there.
I follow you on Instagram as well. I love the stuff that you put out on Instagram. So you can find Tracy on social media platforms, and definitely go and listen to her podcast. She shares so much great information that for me, who didn't know that much about this topic or where to start, I've just found your knowledge, your experience. You come from this from a total different perspective. And I want to share with everyone just how valuable and informative that I believe it is, and the impact that you will make, you have already made, and will continue to make with what you're putting out. The sky's the limit. The sky and beyond is the limit. So Tracy, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for sharing all of this wonderful information, and go and connect with her.
Thank you.